Hello. Hi again, Taylor. It's been a while. Lovely to see you. And we're having some folks hop in. If you can hear me, thank you so much for applying to Kona's Manager Book Club. We've been having some awesome sessions today. We've had 5 planned sessions, your session number 4. So there have been some 3 awesome other sessions that have been happening to accommodate for time zones. And there have been some wonderful discussions between leaders about all sorts of different topics and struggles. So you're in for a real treat. But yeah, while we kind of wait for folks to file in, and I do think we should have a little bit of a larger group, but we'll see how that goes. I'd love to start with a quick little icebreaker. In classic Kona fashion, we'll do the 3 hearts. So green, yellow, and red. If green is fantastic, yellow is okay, and red, terrible. How are you feeling today? Let me know in reactions or comment it out right in the chat. I might, like, if you share, I might ask why you're feeling that way, but you're not obligated to share if you're not comfortable. Taylor, starting with you first, why are you yellow if you're open to sharing?
Yeah, I'm in a little bit of a chaotic mode. We're at my company, we're going through a bunch of changes this month, and so I'm doing a bunch of trainings every day, and it's also spring break, so I'm doing them from a hotel next to Legoland, and my kids are with their grandparents coming in and out, so it's a little hectic. It's fun, it's a little hectic. So they're here, you can hear them, they're yelling, it's fine.
Amazing. And are you able to kind of visit Legoland? Are you big on Legoland, or is it kind of just
No, they went yesterday. I pretty much I'm working throughout the day and then going out to dinner with them. So at least I have that.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Allison, I saw that you flashed a green. Why are you green today?
Yeah, it's just been nice, smooth day, only a handful of meetings. So I was able to feel really productive, which is, I'm here for that. So
I
yeah.
love that. That is amazing. I see some other greens in the cat. Katie, why are you green today?
I am having a very busy week, but on the bright side, it's employee review season over at Glossier, and I have gotten to give a couple of really good reviews and give people raises this week, which feels so good.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And to be able to be a deliverer of good news is always such a joy. So I'm so glad that you got to do that. Okay, I think I might give a minute more. Just as a review, we're doing a quick little icebreaker activity where we share how we're feeling. So green, yellow, and red. Green is great, yellow okay, red terrible. Anybody who hasn't been able to share yet, if you'd like to share, Jessica, why are you green today?
We just had our Easter weekend and it was just good spending time with family. I have a 1-year-old, so this was his first Easter really, and it's just been great. So trying to stay positive, honestly, and work has been going well too. We're just doing a bunch of trainings too, so it's been good, positive.
Okay, I love to hear it. And I'm seeing some other greens. So it's predominantly a green day with maybe some busy yellows thrown in there. I love to hear it. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here for Manager Book Club. You're in for a real treat, as I said before. So before I get started, I just threw into the chat our club member directory. If you use that little notion, you navigate from all members over to customer first leaders. That's the existing kind of discussion session that you're in. We had a lot of folks RSVP, but based off of people's busy schedules, we've had some less than 100% turnout, unfortunately. So you might recognize some faces, you can see backgrounds and kind of use that as a resource as we continue on with our discussions. We are going to be discussing part 1 of Radical Candor, this lovely book. 110 pages in, you kind of hit the end of part 1. And in this, we discuss a lot of the major manager fundamentals around performance reviews, feedback, etc. So that's all for fair game for discussion today. And before we dive in too deep, I'd love to introduce myself. So my name is Yen, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the co-founder of Kona. We're the manager support platform, as well as employee well-being. We're really passionate about supporting managers and middle managers at that. And so I really am fortunate to be surrounded by awesome coworkers, such as my lovely co-host, Monica. Monica.
Hello, everybody. My name is indeed Monica. I am first marketer here at Kona. My biggest passions are reading and management and mental health. So somehow today, right now, I'm merging all of them. I read 100 books every year. Not all of them, of course, are management related because I still only have 2 brain cells and one of them needs to be resting at all times. But when I do read management books, I love discussing them with people. So I'm just so grateful that we have this opportunity to get everybody together and discuss.
Amazing. So super excited to dive in. Before we go too deep, I definitely want to kind of set a container. The subject of radical candor and feedback as a whole can be very touchy, especially when you're in a group full of strangers. So just acknowledging the level of psychological safety that normally is required to have conversations about this. And in proxy, we can kind of talk about these discussion rules and hopefully use that to create a safe space for us to have these conversations. So rule number one, always assume positive intent where possible. We are operating on Zoom. We're operating across different time zones and people have had different days. So assume positive intent, even if maybe something sounds a little bit off, most likely they had good intent in mind. Number two, create a safe space for others. Acting on this can look like making sure other folks get equal airtime, making sure that you're able to validate and encourage folks in the chat. All that really goes a long way for encouraging folks to participate. And that third, acknowledge, validate, and create space for diverse perspectives. We have leaders from all different types of colors and creeds today. We also have folks from different industries, team sizes, and experience. All of this creates a very rich conversation around radical candor. So I just ask that we celebrate this kind of difference that we all have, and we're able to kind of lean into those kind of diverse perspectives. So if we're good there, then I'm going to move straight forward into part one of review. So we just heard the intro. I'm going to go over that kind of review chapter by chapter, every chapter ending with a mini discussion. I'll just ask that we raise hands to kind of spark those discussions, and I'll probably take 2 or 3 folks to share as we're going through each chapter. Then we have a feedback workshop, 10 minutes, 2 10-minute segments basically dedicated to praise and criticism. You'll be able to be paired up one-on-one with somebody in this group, get to know them really well, and also practice some of the things we learned in this book. That's been really valuable for managers so far. And finally, a manager roundtable, your space to kind of raise any problems that you've been facing, whether it's regarding radical candor or otherwise, and basically be able to chat about all that good stuff. So super exciting, and I can promise based off of previous experience, you're in for a treat. So let's dive right in. Number one, part one review and summary. I'd love to kind of dive in with how Kim describes part one in her own words. So early on, we hear that part one is designed to set your mind at ease. Being a good boss is hard for everyone, no matter how successful they appear on the outside. I think this statement is super humbling and really encouraging to hear from somebody like Kim Scott. Management is really hard. So if you're here, you acknowledge how fucking difficult it is, and let's kind of work through it together. Intro. So in this, Kim has this wonderful quote: "The impact of my behavior with Bob didn't stop with him. Others on the team wondered why I accepted such poor work." So if you read the introduction, then you've met Bob. Bob is the very charismatic, lovely employee that Kim had on her team, the cultural rah-rah that everybody loved, the humorous guy. Unfortunately, Bob was also a severe underperformer and really struggled with delivering deliverables on time. And so in this kind of story, we hear how this kind of goes further. Kim refuses or isn't able to give Bob proper feedback. And so when it's time for Bob's termination, his big question is, why didn't anybody tell me? Why is this such a surprise? Why am I being blindsided by this? So as we can talk about the Bob kind of story, I just wanted to raise my first question to the group. How many of you have experienced a Bob, actively have managed a Bob or had to deal with a Bob? Who was the Bob in your life, and what prevented you from being able to give them feedback? And as a quick reminder, just that hand raise would be fantastic. First conversation's always the scariest, so it takes a lot of bravery, but is anybody brave enough to kind of offer up their first anecdote?
I will.
Fantastic, go ahead.
Certainly. So I found this narrative very interesting because I think, anytime in leadership, when you're working with someone that has that overall likability, there's that perception of, oh goodness, there's someone that's really underperforming. But I feel that the team collective really aware of what that individual is, what they can produce or what their lack thereof. So, inheriting someone like a Bob was a case that happened for me. And what I really struggled with was the perception of, why didn't I provide that type of candor initially from the onset? But what happened was, is I acquired that employee just through transitions, et cetera. But there was no dialogue, and where I felt, Kim used a great, emotional whiplash, which I love that terminology which she put in the book of, what's the best practice of when you acquire a new employee that way, that needs that feedback, that suddenly has no idea, they're blindsided knowing that they did not have the skill set to really execute, right? So I think, to the forum, I would, to all these wonderful folks that are on the line today is, what are the best practice, when you acquire a new employee that was mismanaged, and then in turn, how do you start that dialogue from a radical candor perspective? Is everyone, do you follow me? I'm looking for feedback here.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point and stuff. Yeah, Annette, did you want to answer that?
I don't know if this is the answer. I actually want to add another question, because there's also a school of thought, and I don't know how many of you all gone through like Dale Carnegie training, like for leadership and stuff. Their side of it is you have to encourage your person, and then let them learn through training or feedback from potentially once they're performing and how that's affecting them. But it's really tricky because I now that you were walking through your example, I do have a Bob. I realize now that I also inherited, and great person. But yeah, I think we're putting them through training as a first step. But yeah, would love to hear others' thoughts as well.
Yeah, and by the way, Melissa, your question, I've noted it and stuff. We're definitely going to tackle that during the manager roundtable. That way you can get your answer. So put it in your back pocket. It's not going anywhere. And thank you so much for sharing. Jessica, please.
So this is such a great conversation because, and for full disclosure, I have my own company and I do manage a team. And so I'm constantly thinking about how do I communicate with my employees to make sure that we're on the same page, especially because we are all remote. And I run a communications training company, and internally, externally, a lot of folks are asking this. And if you look at the kinds of trainings out there of how do you give feedback, I mean, we might have heard of it. There's this one called SBI. That's kind of like the way you sandwich your feedback. Honestly, there's been a lot of critics, but I like it. I like it because it provides a framework for how do you approach these tricky situations. For those who don't know SBI, the S is situation, the B is behavior, the I is impact. But for me, I always gravitate towards, so Kim has that 4-way quadrant, and she always points to the top right. And the way I kind of interpret that is at the end of the day, it's finding this balance between being warm, but also being competent, right? And because that is what people are attracted to, that's how people listen. So, I mean, I'm just kind of like, I guess, opening up my thought process. But for me, I've always found frameworks like that to be very, very helpful, and just constantly reminding myself anytime we are giving feedback, it's okay, try to be both warm about it, but also being very clear and competent about setting expectations. So that's my 2 cents on this.
I love it. I love the participation. We definitely did not get this much during other sessions. I'm going to have to ask to kind of table the things to make sure that we stay on time and on track, but I don't want to lose anybody's anecdotes or questions, and that open space at the very end, manager roundtable, will be for that space for all these things. So Ryan, Mindy, I'm so sorry. I'm going to move on to the next one, but thank you so much. Awesome. So let's talk about chapter 1. We undervalue the emotional labor of being the boss. This emotional labor is not just part of the job, it's the key to being a good boss. And in this chapter, we get that kind of high level scope. What are managers responsible for? Well, 3 things: results, guidance, and team building. And in doing that, we actually have those kind of key axes of Kim's framework: care personally and challenge directly. So my next question for the group is, what are some of the ways that you care personally at work? I'll take 3 hands and would love to hear how folks are actively showing they care to their employees. And Mindy, Ryan, you're at the top of my list and stuff if you're ready. Yeah, Mindy, please.
Hi, okay. Can you hear me? Okay, so I think just intentionally taking the time out to have the conversations about how they're doing outside of work. I work in the retail industry, so it's very, very quick, and you don't really have the time to sit down and have like an hour conversation. But even just that 15-30 minute conversation, just asking, how are you doing? Right? Just giving that connection and being able to listen to what other stuff is involved before they come to work. And sometimes we are so focused on just work, work, work that we don't take the time, but we have to intentionally make the time. So I think that's what I kind of try to do, even if it's not like a daily basis, at least in a weekly basis, I'll try to, connect with them. Just ask, how's your family? Even ask yourself as a leader, do you know the name of your direct report's son, or how many children do they have? Those are like kind of like important things. It might not be, you don't have to be, asking about all of their private information, but the key things that move them and motivate them and connecting that to work, I think that's what really matters.
Classic. Katie, I'm going to prioritize Ryan first, and then you're right after. Ryan, please.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mindy said, and that was kind of what I was going to get into. But I'll say something that I have found has like a really outsized impact on my direct reports feeling cared for on my team, like based on feedback I've gotten from them, is that we do like I have 4 direct reports, and I do an hour like growth chat with them every month. That is like non-negotiable, does not get rescheduled, does not get booked over. Like it is their time. It's not for status. It's not for work. It's for like, how are they feeling? Where do they want to go? Am I helping them get there? We've started like a new structure based on the ones that I'm doing with my manager, like our SVP, which is like the first month of the quarter. We do like reviews and growth tracks. So like we do a review every quarter at Gorgeous. So we go over the review, we talk through their growth track, what's the progress from the last one. Second month, we do like a discussion on a topic of their choice. So like they can bring me a topic and I can try to like mentor them or like provide feedback or like whatever it is. And then the third month is like career focused. So like, are you getting what you need from this position to like move in the direction of like Kim's talks about like, what is your dream? You know what I mean? Like moving in that direction. So that I think that chat, just knowing that they have that time and how fiercely I protect that time, I think means a lot to them.
Love that so much. And thank you so much for getting specific about those examples. I'm sure a lot of folks really benefited from that story. So thank you. Katie, last but not least.
Also +1 to Ryan. I love that. And we've started doing a similar thing at Glossier where we have a monthly development meeting separate from our regular one-on-ones to talk about growth. I think the other thing is I try to be really transparent and vulnerable about mental health with my team while kind of keeping a professional boundary and showing them it's okay to say that you're not having a great day. You don't need to go into details. You don't need to share things you don't feel comfortable sharing, but it is okay to say like, hey, today's a rough one for me. I could use extra help. And I try to demonstrate that with my team by not always being, yes, rah, rah, let's go. I want to support them, but I also want to be honest with them about how we're all feeling.
I love that so much. I love it. Awesome. Really great points. You're a great group. So just amazing. Chapter 2. I can see I'm going to have to be really, really direct to get through to you. You are one of the smartest people I know, but saying so much makes you sound stupid. This was a quote directly taken from Kim's boss. When Kim had just given a presentation, Kim's boss needed to give her some very direct feedback because she kept brushing it off with her hand. This kind of goes into the radical candor section. Kim provides this as an example of radically candid feedback. We also have 3 different types of feedback that are shared as well, based off of her axes: ruinous empathy, trying to be kind, not wanting to hurt feelings; manipulative insincerity, ego getting in the way. How am I going to look saying this? Do I care enough about this person to say this? And finally, last but not least, obnoxious aggression. The Steve Jobs, your work is shit, basically plain and simple, straight to the point, and often very hurtful. So the next thing I want to raise to the group as we go through these different quadrants, it's very typical to not get it right, not always be perfectly in the radical candor quadrant. So if you had to tag yourself into a quadrant, what quadrant do you typically hang out in? Why do you think you end up in that quadrant a lot? Would love to hear thoughts from the group. And I'll prioritize folks who haven't had as much time to speak to, so please raise your hands. And yeah, would love to hear. I can volunteer information first. Oh, amazing. I'll volunteer first, and then Mindy, feel free to go. I definitely end up in the ruinous empathy quadrant more than I'd like to admit. I'm constantly worried about hurting people's feelings. I definitely have that people pleaser aspect in me. And so it always feels like I need to push myself into this category, even though it feels like I'm in this category. So that's just my personal experience. Mindy, what about you? Oh, you're good.
I got it. Okay.
Okay.
I think for me, I don't want to say it, but sometimes I could be obnoxiously aggression. Um, because I feel like sometimes I do care, but I really am challenging directly. So I go back and forth with radical candor and obnoxious aggression because I mean, as I started growing within, my leadership roles, I realized that, not being able to be transparent could hurt you more and hurt the other person much. But then I just want to make sure that sometimes, even though I want to challenge directly, it might not be received correctly. So my intentions weren't like, being obnoxiously aggressive, but they might have taken it that way. So I think that's where I have to circle back and be transparent and say, hey, I apologize for, giving you this feedback, but I didn't mean it in that way. I meant it more of a way for you to grow. And this is how I felt when I was in that situation. So I do a lot of circling back because then, I'm not perfect, but I do take the time to reflect on how I say things and go back. And I think just that's kind of being able to perfect radical candor.
Yeah. What I really loved about the point you just brought up is that gap between intention and reception. So even though you might not have intended to be very aggressive in that statement, it might have been interpreted as aggression by how that person kind of operates or how the feedback was phrased. So it's a really tricky balance and hard to get right. Thank you so much for sharing. We have time for one more point. Does anybody want to talk about what they typically fall in? Yeah, Jessica, please.
So I think growing up, culturally, things I was taught at home, I would say I probably started out in the top left where you're silent, you're ruminating, you're trying to be very, very considerate of other people. But then we go into the working world and then suddenly we're like, no, 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 you have to be loud, you have to be extroverted. And then so you kind of overcompensate. And then suddenly you can easily fall into this obnoxious, aggressive type. So I think for me, it's like trying to figure out, okay, what is that balance? Because we're trying to get into that upper right-hand quadrant. But for me, it has been a lot of introspection, a lot of just trying to figure out what is my own communication style, right? But a lot of it was also having to reframe, like, how do you carry yourself that feels authentic? And making sure you find that right balance. But yeah, growing up, I think a lot of what I was taught, it fell into that top left, but then now it's like, yeah, we're trying to aim for the top right. So yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's jump to the next chapter. So, chapter 3, for too many bosses, recognition means promotion. And in most cases, this is a big mistake. The key is to recognize their contribution in other ways. So, this is a chapter where we talk about superstars and rock stars, folks with a very, very steep growth trajectory. They're constantly seeking challenges, and rock stars with a much more gradual growth trajectory that often kind of get overlooked, but provide tremendous value and mentorship capability for the organization. We could spend an entire lecture talking about this. For sake of time, I'm actually going to skip over the question, sorry, but we can definitely address it during the manager roundtable. Hopping to chapter 4, I think this one's also quite important. I didn't say Steve is right. I said he always gets it right. Like anyone, he is wrong sometimes, but he insists, and not gently either, that people tell him when he's wrong. And Steve in this situation is Steve Jobs, as Kim discusses in her book. And essentially, we're talking about this get stuff done wheel that Kim and her team have developed. So the question I want to raise to group is, which section do you find easiest and which section do you find hardest? Do you find yourself getting snagged at any of these different points as you're trying to collaborate and actively get stuff done in your different organizations? Annette says the easiest is listening and the hardest is that transition from debate to decide. Definitely can relate with you there. It's hard to tell when the debate is over, especially when there isn't some neat conclusion there, for sure. Anybody else echo that? Any other different hard spots that you notice in the wheel? Yeah, please, Taylor.
I think for me, the persuading part is the most difficult, even for like little things, just like reminding people to do certain things for, a certain reason. Like we've already discussed this is what we're doing. And like that decision between that space between deciding and persuading, like you were saying, is difficult just because you just want to be like, the decision's been made, let's do it. And then also being like, we're going to continue to learn, but in the meantime, we have to do something, and this is what we're going to do. Like, I struggle with getting people to do like exactly what we're doing in that moment and letting them be comfortable that like it's going to change as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm seeing some great answers in the chat, by the way. Thank you so much. So Ryan says the easiest one is clarify for him, and learn is the hardest because you move so fast. And I definitely think a lot of folks in this room probably can resonate. The idea that learn needs to happen at all, that we need to close out that circle, is something I know I definitely struggle with in a very fast-paced environment. And Katie also says listening easy, clarifying, debating is kind of like the harder kind of aspects there. So really great points, and thank you so much. The reason we want to go through each of these chapters, Radical Candor is so much more than just like a feedback book. You go over performance management, collaboration, actively making decisions, and hard decisions at that. So just wanted to really make sure that we give space to that kind of area, and we can address a lot more of those topics in our manager roundtable at the very end. In the meantime, we have this Radical Candor workshop for you. So in a second, you're going to be paired in a group together. You'll basically be on one-on-ones. It's the same one-on-one group, so really get to know the person that you're in the group with. And we'll go through two different scenarios, praise and criticism. So just remember the kind of 4 quadrants as we're doing this task, and we'll start with praise first. In this scenario, a junior teammate took the initiative to fix a broken process, specifically around learning, but whatever have you. One person is going to be the manager and the other person is going to be the receiver. It says sales folks, but just take on your current role. If you're not working in sales, adjust it slightly, but we'll have somebody that is the sales manager and somebody who is fixed the process on their own. In a second, you're going to go to your one-on-one groups, and remember, praise specific, kind, and make sure that it resonates with that individual. It's not just a compliment, it's specific praise. So best of luck, and you'll have about 10-ish minutes. We'll try to stick close to that. Fantastic. And some other folks are currently wrapping up right now. Katie, your cat is so cute. Amazing. Mindy, how was it? Thumbs? Good. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. Awesome. And so as we kind of bring in the last few folks, they're hanging out with the last 5 seconds ago in their breakout rooms. Scenario 2 will be more so about criticism. So we're just going to wait for folks to hop in. Fantastic. And quick thumbs, was it good? Y'all have good conversations. Great. Love to hear it. So the next one is criticism. You're going to have another 10 minutes to go through. This is a part that requires a lot more practice typically, but really take what you learned from Radical Candor as a book into practice. Really simple scenario. A manager notices that their teammate is always late. Person A, the manager again, runs the weekly all hands at 8 a.m. Person B oversleeps. So we'll just have that conversation, use that scenario, and kind of play around with that. Again, when giving critical feedback, be specific, offer examples, clear is kind. Try to avoid the compliment sandwich. It's a very easy default crutch, but if you can, try to be clear as possible in this conversation and really navigate. And once you're done, switch. So we'll throw you back into the breakout rooms with the same person you just worked with and make it happen. Hello, folks. Okay. We have a lot more folks jumping back. So quick show of hands. How was that exercise and stuff? Was it good? Good practice? Kind of awkward? Feeling good about it? Okay. A lot, predominantly thumbs up. So that is fantastic. We got 9 seconds left on the clock. So some folks still coming in. Mindy, how was that? Was it good? Yeah, fantastic. I'm really glad to hear. And amazing. I think Ryan and Taylor are joining us now. Hello again. Was that good? Is that helpful? Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much for participating in that workshop. Radical Candor, I feel like, is something that's easier to, super easy to understand in theory. And then in practice just becomes really gangly, in the weeds, and just sometimes hard to implement. So the more we can practice, the more we can role play with managers and other folks we trust, the better. Make these relationships and like get to know folks, send out LinkedIn connection requests. This is your community to really like lean into, so please do so. And yeah, everybody struggles with this, so let's talk about it and make it normal. Speaking of struggles, this is the next kind of activity is a 15-minute open manager roundtable. So I want folks to be able to feel comfortable raising any sort of problem, seeking advice. This is the situation I'm facing. It could be about radical candor. It could be about something completely different, but this is your space to chat about it and hopefully get some great advice from the people in this room. I first wanted to prioritize Melissa because you raised that amazing question at the very beginning and we weren't really able to give enough space for it. So if you wanted to ask it now, feel free. Otherwise, we can move on to somebody else. But yeah, Melissa, did you want to repeat your question that you had earlier?
Sure, because I used a lot of words, so I apologize for that. I think the question is that when you have a new hire that you acquired through your organization, and you definitely see the potential of this individual, what are your recommendations? Jessica, I know you mentioned, that framework, which I think is brilliant, but how are you going to answer to the overall group of because they have that likability, how do you provide that overall candor with someone that really doesn't produce the net results of what you're looking for, right? I think there is, some great conversation that you have, but when it's just a new hire that you suddenly is reporting to you, you've never had that ability to develop or have that dialogue with that individual. It's just brand new. And what you're seeing right out of the gate, right? Even in Kim's book, with her mentioning, the first 30 days that she knew that Bob had, was terrible at his role. So, do you do it right out of the gate, or do you smooth it over? And I don't know, is that my question too broad?
So I had some thoughts on this, like as you were asking this question, Melissa. So, I found, so in the communications work that I do, I've often found that, when somebody is underperforming, right? First of all, one-on-one conversations, that's just kind of the environment where it has to be in terms of having that really kind of open dialogue with the other person. But I have found that when you take that meeting and kind of make it like a very intentional strategy session with a person, that kind of shows that you are there to really help them versus dictate or change, or and this is also a form of giving feedback. But I have found that, and this is you're letting the person know, like, hey, we're gonna get together and I really want to make this meeting a strategy session for how we can make sure that you'll be successful in your role. And honestly, I just feel like approaching it that way honestly has made a huge difference in terms of people being open-minded and also not feeling necessarily attacked, right? I think that's also a huge thing where people can then be very defensive. But that's kind of my own 2 cents on this. I'd love to hear what other people have to say in regards to this.
Yeah, hi, this is Angela. I just joined a little while ago, so good to meet everyone. I'd agree with the one-on-one, and I do think coming from the point of support and like a strategy for success is definitely a great angle. I think you may have talked about establishing a relationship or getting their perspective initially. And then from there, perhaps level setting on the information you may have already received if there was a handoff, just so you're coming in with shared perspective theirs as well as what you've heard, and then maybe a starting point to move forward from in that more collaborative, how do we set you up for success from here? What do you need? And then also being able to set expectations of what you would like to see and likely prioritize and focus where you can, what's most important.
Love it. Fantastic. And I see some raised hands. Taylor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think someone earlier, I think when we were just introducing ourselves, mentioned it, like said the word training. And I think that might be an interesting way to see it. It's like, we're going to go through a team training. Like, how does this team work? What are our values? What are the ways that like our expectations of each other, and maybe making it like an opportunity to have a refresh with the whole team, with that person, there to, not necessarily call them out specifically in the group, but to be like, let's level set where we are, and then having a separate conversation with that person being like, we're very serious about our team goals, and this is how we get there, and all that.
Definitely. And Ryan, I saw you earlier had a raised hand. Did you want to still share anything?
Yeah. Angela kind of covered what I was going to say. Like, I think it reminds me of like the Julie Zhu quote, like I think if every major disappointment is a failure to set expectations, the idea that like if it's really off of what you expected, then you probably didn't communicate it well. Like obviously there's some situations where someone just didn't deliver, but I think about that quote a lot. And I think for me, it would be the first step would be like, yeah, getting to know them. Second step would be understanding what they think the expectations are before I share mine. And then aligning where there is a gap there. So like recently I took on someone who was a video editor and we're doing video content creation, which is very different for him. And so I set the expectation of like, I'm not expecting you to be a master content creator this quarter. I like want you to fail. Actually, I want you to kind of figure out what is working, what's not working for our channel, and a lot of experimentation. And like that would be success for me. Like come to me with insights at the end of the quarter, not a bunch of extremely polished videos. And I think that was really helpful to show him that like what the expectation was and like where I was expecting him to take the project. And so that I got what I was looking for at the end of the quarter.
Fantastic. And really, really, I love the quote that you shared. I think that is something I'm going to write on a post-it note and stick on my forehead because that is just fantastic. Amazing. We have time for another few kind of questions to be raised to the group. Does anybody have something they've been facing that they want to get advice on?
I have one. I would say like I'm mostly in the radical candor like quadrant just naturally, but the only time I ever struggle with it is when I'm giving feedback to like a peer or someone that's not like reporting into me, because there is a level of not only trust on my team because we work together more often, but like they expect me to give them feedback. I'm their manager. Whereas if I'm giving it to another manager or a peer, then it can be a little bit more difficult. I was just curious if anyone has any thoughts on kind of like bringing radical candor and 100% honesty to peer relationships and how you kind of set that up so that they don't feel like you're overstepping.
It's a really good question. Anybody have any thoughts? Ryan, would you say that you tilt more towards like ruinous empathy in that situation or more of the obnoxious aggression with the peer, I guess?
I would say more ruinous empathy. I'm not really an aggressive person. I pretty much only stay in the top two quadrants. And yeah, like I do think my company has the culture to give the 100% honesty and for it to be received properly. But like, for example, I had a coworker who's no longer with the company. She was let go, we parted ways. And it was she was very stubborn with feedback. And so that made it harder to be radically candid because she took it personally every time. Even though I was doing it in a nice way, I wasn't being aggressive. I was delivering feedback and trying to preface it with like, I want to help you work with my team better. And the way I held it in that situation was like, I established the expectations up front because it was like not me directly, it was my direct report who was working with her. And that made me even more sensitive to the issue because like I can deal with someone being difficult, but no one is going to be difficult with my team. And so that made it easier to kind of step into action on that. And, consistent and early feedback to her, consistent and early feedback to her manager to establish a paper trail. And I think the good part about that was like when we did part ways, like she wasn't surprised, her manager wasn't surprised, like no one was surprised on the team because everyone had seen, like we said earlier, people recognized the behavior. And so I felt better about that. But I don't know if I would have gone and said it as early if it had been like me dealing with her being a pain and not my direct report, for example.
That's super interesting. And I think in you describing that story, it's interesting. Proximity and liking a person can really have you excuse a lot of their behaviors, even if it's not necessarily the best for the company or for your working relationship. And it's interesting that that level of distance allowed you to kind of go up on the candor scale. And so maybe for you, that maybe that proximity is the kind of thing that hurts in a little bit of a way, and kind of creating a little bit of emotional distance might help you in the future. But I think it's a really interesting scenario and something that like I definitely struggle with. And so take everything with a grain of salt because I'm right in that boat with you. Jessica, please.
I was thinking about your question, Ryan, about how do you manage it when you're afraid that you might be overstepping or you may be saying something that may be, let's say, too candid. And I was thinking about one of the things that I often talk about, which is one way is to actually hedge, like that's actually the word you can hedge what you're about to say. And it's actually kind of like a strategy where you can say like, I'm sorry, this might come off a bit harsh, but sometimes when you hedge something that maybe a bit, it might sting a little bit, it then comes off a little less harsh. So hedging, I've always found to be kind of like a communication strategy. If you want to be candid, but it may be kind of like, it might sting a little bit. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I love that tactic. That's fantastic. We are coming up on time, so just to make sure that everybody has the resources they need to succeed, I'm going to, that was my timer. I'm going to share our little book club hub and kind of get you acquainted with some of the resources you get by being in this little club of ours. We had over 200 applicants. We were only able to select around 100 of them. So you are in this exclusive little group that's been handpicked, and we have some amazing leaders that you've met here in group today, but also that you'll be able to meet inside our part 2 discussion on April 26th in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, we have this little Notion that we painstakingly designed for you and stuff. So this is our Manager Book Club hub. It has all the resources you might need, including details on that next live session. It'll have recordings and also the slides that you saw today for us to kind of go through. Other things, the club member directory is your friend. You saw a lot of faces here. Everybody inside the Customer First Leaders group were invited to this group essentially and have some context on who you might be. So feel free to send them over a LinkedIn connection request, build those relationships. Management can be very isolating and lonely. So please make some friends out of this group. That's the entire intention. And then as you're also navigating, please know that you have some other resources, for example, member discounts. Kim Scott's team was nice enough to give you a video book. So let's just say in the next 2 weeks, you're going through hell, you don't have time to actually read the next half of the book, watch the video. It takes less than 25 minutes to watch the entire video course on just Kim Scott's Radical Candor. It's free. Please don't give it out to your entire company because we have a limited number of coupons, but you can give them your account. I won't tell anybody. So we can do that there. And then also you get 15% off of Kona. As a reminder, we're the manager co-pilot and employee well-being support tool. Essentially, managers love to use us to support their teams, check in, make sure that you're actually able to support folks in the moment, etc. And last but not least, if you want to ask Kim Scott a question, you need to submit it in advance and be selected. If you are selected, you can raise your hand and literally talk to Kim Scott, which I think is the coolest thing ever, and we're super excited. So please go over to that book club hub, submit a question, you might be selected, and then you'll have an awesome conversation with Kim and get your question personally answered. So those are just some of the resources available to you. I know we're at time and folks are super busy. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Please don't be a stranger. Send me a LinkedIn connection request, and I will see you soon in our next session. Thank you, thank you, thank you.